Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today I'm so excited to have here with me Ruthie Cease. Ruthie is a money and wealth embodiment coach, a Reiki healer, and all around badass boss lady who I admire and adore so much. So thank you so much for joining me. Ruthie's joining me all the way from Las Vegas as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Hi, I'm so excited to have you on because there's a topic that has been touched on in the different episodes and conversations that I've had. I've definitely brought it up in my own videos that I've shared and everything like that, but I really wanted to take the opportunity to dive deep into it with you, and that is all around boundaries and setting boundaries, because I know that that has been a big piece for you. So
yes.
yeah, with a big sigh. So I guess just pretty much, right? I guess to start us off, because there's so many areas you could start, but I guess to start us off is, what was your journey in understanding and realizing the importance of having boundaries in your life and in your work? You can speak to either or both.
Boundaries in my life. Well, I did not grow up in a boundaried home. I feel that in the last year or two is when I've really come to know intimately the importance of boundaries. Simply because I don't know how to describe it, but it's like I have a vision of boundaries as teaching people how to be successful in a relationship with you. And what I found was that I didn't have a lot of successful relationships. I had really great coach-client relationships, but I didn't have a lot of great family relationships. And that tended to lean towards the fact that there were no boundaries, not because my boundaries weren't honored, but more so because there was more of enmeshments than there were boundaries. So like enmeshments of my energy being permeable and people just thinking or believing that they could just treat me however they would want to be treated, or however they wanted to treat me, not how I would want to be treated. It was all off. And I started to realize, like, the more inner child work I did, that the lack of boundaries that I grew up with was starting to seep into my business. And I was really overworked and tired. And not to say that I'm not those things now. I'm definitely not overworked now. I'm definitely not perfect. It's still a work in progress, but I can say with absolute confidence that in the last 6 months, I made huge changes in my personal life around relationships and boundaries, around like what I'll tolerate and what I won't. And I've also implemented that into my business. With my business, it's more so, does this really equate, or is it on the same level as how I say I want to feel in my business? Like, am I following through with what I say I want for myself in my prices, in my schedule, in my launching, in my contracts, in my even just like the way I expect people to show up for me, not just the way that I show up for them. And so, yeah, I hope that answers that first question.
No, that's perfect.
Rambling.
No, it kind of, to me, it shows the true process of, like, when you come to set boundaries, it feels like a big old ramble. Like, it feels like this, not that I felt like you rambled, but like, it feels like this, it's that big long process of, oh, and it's this, and oh, then it's this, and then oh, it's over here as well. Holy shit. Okay. Right. Great. So good. So like, it can feel like that larger process of unpicking and realizing where you're not holding boundaries, even if you're already doing the boundary work. Yeah.
Right. And it really kicked in for me about a year ago when I started like, I started really diving into like what I wanted out of my work and like what I wanted with all the money I was making, and like what was it all for, right? And like how did I want to feel in my business, and what kind of way did I want to show up in the world? And then what was getting in the way of that? Like this bigger vision I have for myself and for my life and for my family and for my work. And like, what were the things that were blocking me from that coming into reality? And then what were the relationships or the circumstances that were sucking the life out of me? Whether it's like an offer that I was putting out that wasn't aligned, but I felt like I had to do it because of money, or whether it was a relationship with a client that I needed to let go of because it was unhealthy, or whether it was with someone in my family. You know, it's just like when you start to get very clear on who you are and why you're here, and you have a really honed in understanding of your vision, the next step in the process of making that a reality is, okay, well, what's in the way? Yeah. And then we get introduced to all of the areas where we need to set boundaries.
And it's so much fun to be like, oh, shit, this is on me.
Yeah, it can actually be like so painful. And because like you start to see what you thought was real wasn't, or what you thought was an authentic, loving relationship was really just controlled. Like you start to see like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
This isn't what I thought it was. And it's just been like a crazy year of me becoming more embodied in my truth and like who I am and why I'm here. And the more I do that work, the easier it gets to set boundaries, because I'm like, well, my energy is so profound and so strong and so loving and warm, and it is a high vibration. And like, why would I let anything in that wasn't a match?
It's such a good question, because that's kind of like, that's the first part, is like, why would I accept anything that doesn't feel good for me, that feels like it's draining for me? And immediately, like, I'm mentally reminded of all the reasons that past me would have created for that. Like, well, I need to, because I need to earn this money. It's
right.
Like, all right.
Patterns, behaviors, old belief systems, all of that. Oh yeah, it's 1000%. Like once you start to recognize the things that are in the way and the things that are sucking the life out of you, you start to recognize your role in it and where you can clean up your side of the street. And that's where you get to like implement the boundaries, right? So that's where we get to go, you know what? I have to have a really hard conversation with this person, or I need to decide where to shift in my business, or I need to let go of this relationship, or I need to cut back on my work hours, right? Like cut my work hours in half, double down on my devotion, double down on me, on my work with me. That was the biggest boundary. And honestly, I set that time and time again, and then old patterns would come up and it would be like, but you have a goal to hit, but you really want to like push or whatever. And like all these old behaviors would come back in. And so now I'm finally in a place where I'm setting a new, like I'm doing it again. And that's the thing, is that like with boundaries, you might go to set it and you might not follow through, and that's okay, right? What matters most is that you keep showing up and assessing and going, okay, where did I fall short? What could I have done differently? And did I just fall back into another pattern? And now what? Another layer of inner work, another layer of healing, and then another opportunity for you to set the boundary again.
Yeah.
And follow through and embody something different this time.
Yeah, I see it also like in that process. It's baby steps also. Like I've been
Oh
like in my
yeah.
business, I've been doing work in the past, not at the moment. I'm actually finally at the point where I'm like, none of the work I'm doing feels like it was outside of my boundaries. Like this is really solid. But I've had to be in the position in my past before where just to survive, like just to survive, I had to do this
Yeah.
work. And it was aligned initially because it was like, great, okay, you need this next step. And then I'd realize that it's then malaligned, and I'd be like, all right, but I'm still here because I still need this. And then I looked at the what next, and then I kind of had this mental plan, or maybe it was an emotional plan, who knows, but like this plan of like, okay, well, as soon as I get something else that's aligned, this is the order in which I'd let go of that work,
Mm.
because this is the day, or the time or the place that is really, really draining me. So that's the one I'd let go first. Like, so I'd sort
Mm.
of have this step plan. If I still had to be in it for survival reasons, I'd still have this step plan of, right, okay, but I'm working on it. This is me setting my boundaries of at least recognizing this is outside of my alignment. This is not what
Yeah.
feels right to me, and this is the plan that
Right.
I'm working on. So like even on that,
Right.
if you're on that base survival level, you can
Yeah.
still have that plan.
Excuse me. Totally. And I think like I can relate to that 1000% because I told myself going into the fall, I was like, I'm not going to overbook myself. I'm going to slow down. And then of course I got so overbooked in August and September or in September and October. And then I was like, you know what? I'm really doing it this time. And where did
Mm,
that energy come from? I don't know if it came from survival. I think it came from excitement of like just
yeah,
being so in flow that like you don't want to stop. But then you get to this place where you're like, wait a second, I'm not honoring what I say I want for myself. So like where can I find the medium of like being so boundaried that like I'm only working 3 days a week for 4 hours a day, but I'm booked out those days. So I feel fully expressed in my work, but I'm also honoring so it's like a lot of times setting boundaries is like compromising in some
mm,
ways, right? Not with yourself, but like finding a blend is probably a better word. Finding a blend of desires. So like
yeah,
it's interesting. And that these are just examples of like work um boundaries. I think relational boundaries are so different.
oh, I definitely want to go into
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, they're so different, and they're just like, and boundaries with the universe around money, and like
Mm,
boundaries with money, and boundaries with pricing. I mean, all of that is so different, right? So, like in my world, some of this stuff around work boundaries does not apply to relationship boundaries.
oh my god.
you,
Well, yeah, like
you
with
just can't
relationship boundaries.
compromise.
No, you can't. Like with the relationship boundaries, I really love, and I've shared this quote of yours before as well, is how boundaries are letting other people know how to be successful with you in relationship,
Yeah.
in any kind of relationship. And I love it because it's so true. I mean, the friendships and relationships I have that are closest to me are the ones that say, "Hey, this is what I need." And then I can be like, "Oh, great. Now I know how I can like give
For
you,
you.
or yeah, allow that, like from my end, allow that for you or honor that
Right.
for you." Yeah, it's so much
Right.
easier because then I'm not using energy of guessing either.
Amen. Thank you. And yeah, it's also like boundaries are a form of self love. When you know what you want and when you are feeling so empowered to speak it out loud and set the boundary of this is what I will allow, you're showing someone else how much you value yourself, that you hope that they would follow tune and value you in the same way. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with business. Like, I mean, you've been in my space for a while now. I am pretty fucking firm.
Oh, and I love it so much because it helps me as someone who like who generally like wants to honor people's boundaries. It's like, oh cool, now I know what that is. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And also like allowing people to have an insight of like what the kind of behavior you want to see in your space, right? I think one of the most profound experiences with boundaries I had was
I'm ready. Hit me.
Was in my previous marriage. It was a very abusive situation, and it got to the point where I was living in Seattle, and I had some family there. And after I left that relationship, I started to notice I was getting invited more to family events, like family get-togethers and dinners and holidays and things like that. But when I was still married to this person, I wasn't. And I asked my aunt about that, because that was the family that I had there. My aunt and my uncle and my cousins, they lived there. And so I remember saying, like, Aunt Terry, that was my aunt. I was like, Aunt Terry, I don't like, why? It's interesting. Like, I'm starting to get more connected with the family. Like, I'm noticing that when I was with so-and-so, we weren't invited as much. And she goes, yeah, because nobody gets to come into my house and make me feel uncomfortable.
Oh.
And I was like,
Aunt Terry, you badass.
You got it, sister. Like, got it. Right. And so and I've used that for like the basis of all boundaries. Like, I even use it in my marriage. If there's like something that's off and I feel funky or unsafe, we have a conversation immediately. What's happening here? What's going on? Why? What are you feeling? This is what I'm feeling. And we clear the air, because nobody gets to come into my space and make me feel funky, unsafe, questioning myself or anything. And the second that happens, there's a conversation that's had. And if it's not honored or seen or validated or heard, you're gone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are. I've set boundaries with people in my family, like very cutthroat boundaries of just like, and I think that it's part of the root chakra work of reclaiming your right to be here and have standards of living, and the way that you receive love and safety in your life. And like, that's been my work for the last like 2 or 3 years, is like a ton of I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. But I can't feel safe if I don't have boundaries. So a lot of my inner work has been around reclaiming that autonomy of like, this is what's right for me, not what you think is right for me. This is what I know is right for me. And then asserting those boundaries is like a whole other conversation. But yeah, like it's that one moment, that conversation, it laid the framework for boundaries for me. I was like, dang, man, she's solid. And then I felt, how can I implement that into my everyday life? How can I implement that in my parenting? How can I implement that in my business, in my friendships? And with social media right now, like, we're at the height of craziness in our country, because the election's like next week. And then
there's a bit going on
over the world. It's like COVID, right? And so like, I've had to remove people from my feed. I've had to snooze people. I've unfriended like almost 1,000 people, like just cleaning up space and making space for more aligned, loving energy.
I think the challenge, because you hit the nail on the head there as well, like the challenge sometimes is like having the uncomfortable conversation. Like it can feel, and this is why in the past I haven't set boundaries, especially in like personal relationships, because it's so scary. Like, or it can be so scary, especially when you're getting used to it, or especially when you're learning, because people around us will have an adjustment period, good or bad, of like responding or reacting to our boundary setting. We just can't we can't help that. That's their process, and then what happens out of that depends on the person, I guess. But that I think that's why it can feel so scary for people to set boundaries, because they're like, oh, I can't, because this person's not going to respect them, or I don't know what the response is going to be. And then it might lead to a harder conversation or a harder like action step to take on my part as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had to have conversations recently about boundaries. So in July, I had to have a really hard conversation with someone in my life. And I was just like, this is how I need you to show up for me at this time in my life. This is what I need. This is what I want. This is what I won't allow. And this is what I don't need. And, you know, because I was at a fork in the road of like, do we stay in Washington or do we move to Vegas? And it was a really hard choice. And I made my choice, and then I was delivering the choice and the news of the choice. And I was delivering the news of the choice is when I had to set the boundary. And so I worked time and time again with my therapist on this of just like, how do I do this? And she was so awesome of like just explaining, I have news for you, or I have something to say. This is what I want to say. And this is how I would feel so supported in this process.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I wouldn't feel supported in this process. So you're being very clear about what to do and what not to do, or what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. And I remember having that conversation and like literally like I was like, I thought I was gonna die. Like, my heart was pounding. I was having a panic attack, and this person was like, what is wrong? It's okay. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. You don't understand. This is hard. And then I set the boundary though. And what's really interesting is that it was not honored, and there was backlash, and that's fine. And then my reassertion of my boundary was expressing my feelings. Hi, I see you. Thanks for touching base. The way that this went down is not cool with me. I don't like it. I won't tolerate it until I receive some sort of apology or whatever. Then, so you give the boundary, until this happens, I won't be communicating with you. Mm. Or until this happens, this is happening.
Yeah.
Right? Or whatever the thing, right? So, and that's hard because this person was a huge part of my life, and cutting that person out or laying that boundary with that person was a total, like, it was a loss. Like, sometimes I think we have to prepare ourselves, because we go, well, I don't know if I want to set a boundary because I just don't know like how it will be received. And that was the thing. I was avoiding having the conversation forever because I was like, I don't know how this person will take it. I feel like I'll be completely cut out.
Guilty.
And it's like, I knew I was avoiding it, but like, what good does avoiding do? And so I decided the only way I'm going to grow and expand and feel what it feels like to be very embodied and boundaried in my choice, and is by just being so transparent and vulnerable and open and saying, this is really uncomfortable for me, but this is what I feel and this is what I want. And if you can't give that to me, I'm sorry, but right. And then you don't get to be in my space, or our relationship will shift and change. Yeah. Maybe it's not that you don't have a relationship with them, but it's that it's going to look a little different.
I think that's it. That's the second piece of setting boundaries. Like, the first piece is setting them, and that can be scary because you don't know what the response is going to be. But the second piece is actually holding them and like letting them know, so okay, painful. Like, yeah. And it's not necessarily about schooling the other, well, it's not really about schooling the other person. It's just like hey, I love you. This relationship matters to me, but this is what I need. And if I can't get what I need, then I don't know how yet, but it will change. And then if they don't meet that, you have to hold them. Otherwise, there's they'll realize that you don't respect their boundaries. So like, this is all subconscious mostly anyway, like, you know,
Right.
even for people
Yeah.
who have the right intentions for us, subconsciously they'll be like, oh, that boundary's not really there, so never mind.
Right. Yeah, it becomes an integrity piece when you're, so like I feel maybe the first step is actually getting clear on what you do want and how you want to
Mm.
feel, and then it's setting the boundary, and then it's asserting and honoring, right? And then like enforcing. And then when it doesn't get honored, like, then what?
Mm.
Right? When it doesn't get honored and we let that happen, we're way out of integrity with ourselves, right? And then we are disembodied. And then the shitstorm starts to happen.
Yeah,
And
then
we
nothing
start to
flows.
say, yeah, but then it's like all of a sudden your auric field becomes super permeable, and you start to invite more like enmeshment and I don't want to, assault isn't the right word, but like you start to invite more invading vampire-y energy into your
Yeah.
space. And then you're just like, you're always being drained, and then you never feel good. And so it's like in my business, I had to like really get honest with myself around like, why is it that I'm not setting these boundaries? Why is it that I'm not honoring what I say I want for myself? And a lot of it was because I felt like I'm in a groove. Why would I slow that down? And people want this, so why wouldn't I show up for it? But meanwhile, like my business is thriving, but my son is frustrated when I'm not present, or the things behind the scenes are not as good as they could be if I were boundaried. So like if we're not boundaried in all areas, maybe we're boundaried in our relationships but not in our work, and then what ends up happening in our relationships is they start to suffer, and they're not like, there's no balance, right?
Yeah. And like, but then
So
there's the flip side of setting boundaries, of how much better it can be and how much
yeah,
more fulfilling your relationships can be when those boundaries are set and honored. So like, it's not just all negative. Like, sometimes boundaries are actually met. Sometimes like
I
the other
know.
person's like, thank you, cool, awesome, like I love this for you. And that is the best feeling in the world. Like,
Mm,
it's, and it just shows us that we can experience like enriching, deep, fulfilling relationship with other people
yeah,
if we honor that as well.
right. And then we can have those corrective experiences for when they weren't
Mm.
honored in the past, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that was huge too. Like, um, I think it's interesting too, because there's been no part of me that has believed that just because my boundaries weren't honored once means that they're never going to be honored, right? It's just like
Mm.
you get to compartmentalize all of that and go, yeah, it wasn't honored there, but I honored it. I honored the boundary that I set. So if I'm honoring it, then I will immediately expect other people to honor. And if they're not honoring it, it's still my responsibility to show up for it.
Mm. Yeah, I think the corrective experience is the really important piece in that. Is like, if you've had the experience, and I know I have it in the past as well, like if you've had the experience of people just not honoring your boundaries at all, or not honoring your own boundaries because you're afraid other people are,
Fear.
yeah, like all
Yeah.
the like, and it's like this vicious cycle between not honoring and not
Oh,
honoring and not
totally.
honoring and not honoring. And if you have that experience and you've done a whole bunch of work, and then you're at this place and you're like, okay, I can honor my boundaries, but I'm still like terrified that if I like that, what will happen when I say them out loud, you can have the corrective experience.
Right.
Yeah.
How have you had the corrective experience with that? Like, what's your process with all of that, with going, oh, okay, so what's the worst that could happen if I state my boundaries out loud? What am I so afraid of?
I think for me, it's been the process of finally like prioritizing my experience over the relationship, whatever kind of relationship it is, whether it's family or someone close to me. Like, it's I can still acknowledge that I care and like care about that relationship and love that person, but I think for me it's the process of finally prioritizing how I feel
Mm.
over that actual relationship, even though that matters to me. And that's hard for the
Mhm.
sometimes for the person on the other end to hear, because there's an like the ego involvement, and they maybe don't understand boundaries as well. But for me, yeah, it's really been that whole, actually, if I'm not experiencing this as a positive thing in my life anyway, then what's the point of
Yeah.
like, you know, of of hanging on to this? Whereas when I set the boundary, sometimes the relationship changes or leaves, or sometimes it gets stronger and it gets enriched, and then I get to go, oh, yay. Like,
Right? Yeah,
uh-huh.
and it's interesting is like, so I think when we get sunk into the whole like, well, I'm afraid to have the conversation, like the appropriate thought process would be, so what's the worst that could happen? I state my boundary and it's not honored. Okay, and then what? And then
Mm,
what? And then what? I didn't die.
yeah. It's
I
going to
think
be
we just have to
uncomfortable.
like,
Yeah.
right, we have to like peel back those layers and start to ask ourselves real questions around like, is this a legitimate fear, or am I just in a pattern of trying to people please so that people buy my products or stay in relationship with me, or because it's safe or whatever? And I think those are the kinds of things we have to get radically honest with ourselves about.
Mm, yeah.
And
And
am I in a behavioral pattern right now? Am I avoiding because of trauma? What's really going on here?
yeah, what is telling me the story of what's going to happen? Like, what's informing me of like, and my beliefs about what will happen, or like if I do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yep, exactly.
It's so good. I love this conversation so much.
I love it.
Yeah, it is. It's just, and it's a process. And like, I still have moments where, like, of fear, for sure. Like, no matter, I think no matter how
Mm-hmm.
far you come, you're still allowed to be human and to experience
Oh
like
yeah.
the human things around the challenging things. Like, even if you're really boss at setting boundaries, you can still experience, it doesn't mean you don't
Oh gosh.
experience the fear or the apprehension of, okay, and I think it comes a different version, especially once you identify what you need to do if that person doesn't honor the boundary. Like, because you're like, okay,
Oh
well, I
yeah.
know what I need to do. But I find that that's more empowering than the fear of not knowing what happens if they don't set their boundary, because I
Mm-hmm.
still get to be like in charge of my side of it. So like in the
Right.
past, I've been like, oh, I'm not getting this boundary met, and oh, I'm afraid to ask for it. But then even if I ask for it, there's a fear of like, well, I don't know what happens, and I don't like having that fear. I'd rather be like, okay, on the other side of it is going, well, I know what happens, because I know that what needs to change if that
Oh
boundary is not
yeah.
honored. And then there's
Right.
still a fear or an apprehension, because I may still value that relationship and I may still want it around, but you know, I have
Right.
to honor myself.
Yeah.
But at least I know, it's like, well, at least I have a plan. Like, it's almost like
Right.
this safety and
Exactly.
comfort. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I get it. I still like feel nervousness or a little anxiety whenever I go to set boundaries, and like, and then even just like making like a whole new schedule for November was nerve wracking, because it's like, well, like I don't want to make myself unavailable for people, but I don't want to be working all fucking day either. Right? Like at
Yeah.
some point I need to be with my husband and my son and sleeping and taking care of myself and doing my own work, like, and I need to have creative time, like, and so what gives, right? And then so what happens if I set these boundaries and I make very clearly that I'm only working this time a day from like 10 to 2, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, with the occasional exception on Monday or Friday, right? So what would happen? Am I going to piss people off? Are people going to think, oh, she's so like pompous or whatever. Like what's really going on is I'm avoiding setting the boundary because of judgment, right? Because of fear of judgment, fear people won't like me or whatever. Fear of loss of income, fear of what am I going to do with my time? Fear of being, fear of integrating, fear of not working, fear of change, fear of, oh my God, so I set this boundary and things are working and it's going amazing and everybody is loving and understanding and supportive. And then what? So it could go both ways, right? Like we could be avoiding because of A and we could be avoiding because of B or both or whatever. And like, once we just have the awareness, we can move through it and do it anyway. I do it anyway.
And in the way that you teach as well is like make it safe for your nervous system. So like start small. You don't have to build these big fuck off walls like straight up, right? And it's not even about walls, but you know, like just start small. Let yourself practice having the little conversations that might still be scary but don't feel as consequential, you know. And
totally right. And I think meeting yourself where you're at is so important. And once you get confident in that area, you can start to implement and take bigger actions with bigger boundaries. But it's one of those things where we just have to start small. And it could be like, I mean, we've talked about this, like starting small as in like brushing your hair every day, starting small as in, no, I'm not going to check my phone after 8 p.m. at night, or no, I'm not going to be like scrolling social media after, like setting those smaller boundaries with yourself first and then following through with it allows you to set it outside of you easier.
Yeah, it's like practice with you first. What do you need to do for you that doesn't actually involve other people? Like it's just, what do you need to do for you? So for me, it's one of the things is I don't reply to, unless it's like immediate for like the very next morning, right? But like I don't reply to work related emails or messages or anything after a certain time. Or like, you know, on the weekend, on my version of the weekend, you know, whatever that is, like I just make sure that I'm like, okay, that's going to switch me into a headspace that I don't want to be in because this is my downtime. And I don't even have to necessarily like verbalize that to the other party because my behavior shows it. They learn not to expect, and I've worked with clients on this exact same topic, like they learn not to expect a reply necessarily after a certain time at night, you know, or whatever it is, like, and it's, you don't even have to verbalize that most of the time. Sometimes it's just like that you just teach them what to expect by following through.
And I've often, like, I go into coaching relationships and I set the boundary right out the gate, right? So like it's written in the contract, it's declared in the first call, and then if I do group coaching, it's declared in the first call. Like this is how I work. So
it's perfect. Like it, as someone who is on the other side of your coaching and on like the receiving end of that, which I love, but it makes it so much easier to just be like, okay, cool. That's what I can expect. Or like I've messaged you because we're on different time zones. So I've messaged you knowing that it's your Sunday night, where I've been like, oh, I'm just messaging you just while I think of it, but like reply when you can, knowing that you'll honor that anyway. But like that's my acknowledgement of, just so you know, I'm aware of that as well. So it's all like, you know, whenever like that, like it's an easy, it makes it so much easier to be in any kind of relationship when you know
we're in harmony. Everybody's in harmony because you're like, this is what I need in my role. This is what I expect of you in your role. What about you? What do you need and what do you expect from me? And then it's going to work. Like
Yeah.
that's the beauty of boundaries. And I really love them. They're hard as hell and sometimes really painful, but they're so worth it. So
Mhm.
worth it.
I agree. I think that's it's a good note to end on. I could talk for hours with you about this. I feel so
I know. Me too.
it's so good. But it's the recognition that it can be challenging, it can be scary as hell. But it can also be really, really liberating, and it can create, especially when it involves other people, can create an enrichment and fulfillment in the relationships that you didn't know you could experience just because of that. And that is really, really special and really, really amazing.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
agree.
Thank you so much for coming
You're
on and
welcome.
sharing and talking with me
You're
about it. I
welcome.
love this topic to the
Yeah.
end of time. So yeah, I really appreciate you. Appreciate your time as
You're
well. So
welcome.
thank you so
Of
much.
course. I love you so much.
Where can people find you? I'll include it in the caption in the show notes, but where can people find you and your work?
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram at The Wealthy Soul or on Facebook at Ruthie Cease. My website is being completely revamped, so that should be up soon. And when I get it, you can edit the show notes if you want.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so, so much. Really
You're
appreciate you and
welcome.
your wisdom.
Thank you.